When it came to the design, I decided to start with the blade first because I think having a cool looking blade is probably the most important part of having a nice knife. So I started with this sort of rough profile here, and it's always a good idea to start with your print orientation, an idea of how you want to set it up, because there's a lot of factors that depend on that. And so I decided I wanted to print it on this back face here, and that meant I would have to put a raft on the part, which is another separate piece that prints around the bottom, and it just gives it more support to keep it from falling over during printing or sintering. But what it would allow me to do is get more detail on the side of the blade. And so it allowed me to add a couple of cool things like these little hexagon cutouts. For some reason, these are super popular in 3D printing. I don't know what it is, but I fall into that category too. And then I also decided to add the Markforged logo here. And what I was talking about earlier, because I'm printing this on its back, I get to draw out this logo with the layer height. And the height of each layer is about 0.2 millimeters. Whereas if I was to print it on this face, it would be using the diameter of the nozzle to draw out this logo. And the nozzle diameter is 0.4 millimeters, so it's twice as big. So that's sort of like drawing with a big marker using the nozzle versus using a fine tip pen by taking advantage of the layer lines. So from that point, on that same sort of thought, I decided to leave a little bit of extra on the edge here because I just can't go thin enough with the diameter of the nozzle to get an actual sharp edge. And I'm going to be sharpening this thing anyways after it prints and sinters, so not a problem there to leave a little bit of a flat spot. So then the only piece of the puzzle left was to add my pivot point over here. And I decided I wanted to put a piece of plastic, like a sort of spacer here. That way I wouldn't have to worry about getting the exact size of this hole. And it just kind of opens it up because we don't have a drill press. So being able to use plastic and kind of play around with that fitment if needed should be pretty convenient. So at this point, I was feeling pretty good about the blade. I think it looks really cool. And it was getting towards the end of the day, so I just decided to sort of rush through the rest of this, get my handle and the rest of the pieces done. That way I could print a cheap PLA prototype, just out of a cheap prototyping plastic, and that way I could have this thing, see the fit and function and feel and the size, make sure it was good before I went all the way with metal and carbon fiber and all the fancy stuff. So this is sort of what I came up with for the full knife here. So again, I kind of rushed through the handle here. I went with a relatively simple sort of rectangular shape, but I left these cutouts for the heads of some bolts that we had at the shop. And on the other side, I left some cutouts for brass heat set inserts that get melted into the handle and add some thread. On the inside of the blade here, we've got our other critical features. The blade lock, I decided to print it flat out of metal, and that would keep me from having, if I bent this up in place already, I would have a lot of supports underneath. And because this is metal, I can just as easily print it flat and then bend it up later, which meant I could leave a little bit extra on this sort of edge where it interfaces with the knife. And I could just grind away at it and make sure I get the exact fit I needed. I also added this little nub here, which locks into one of the little hexagon cutouts. That way this knife doesn't come open while it's in my pocket and cut my leg open. Probably wouldn't be a very good knife if it did that, so the little nub should help. And then I also decided to just integrate these spacers. That's one of the nice things about 3D printing is it's just integrating different pieces of hardware that could very easily be printed together with very little extra material cost there. So that should space the two handles halves away from each other perfectly. And then we talked earlier about using a metal dowel pin. So this just press fits into the two halves of the handle. And all that we had left from there was our little spacers. And one of these actually fits inside of the pivot point, so I can get a more precise fit around the bolt that goes through here. And that pretty much covers all the parts on the first draft here. So let's see what it looked like to set this up and get it printed.